The following is a paid advertisement of St. Anthony Hospital Orthopedics. References to any specific product, services, or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by St. Anthony Hospital, Carroll Broadcasting, or its advertisers. The views expressed by the host or guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Welcome to the St. Anthony Hospital Orthopedic Show with Dr. Richard Godding. Dr. Godding specializes in joint preservation, reconstruction, and replacement surgery, and brings over 25 years of orthopedic excellence to St. Anthony Hospital and to the Carroll area. For more information about Dr. Godding, his practice, or St. Anthony Orthopedics, go to santanthonyhospital.org or make an appointment by calling 712-794-5536.
Good Sunday morning, Iowa. It's Dr. Rick Godding. Thank you for choosing to spend some time with me here this Sunday morning. And I will tell you that I haven't really talked all that much this year about football, and part of that is because my beloved Oklahoma State University Cowboys are terrible. And we had the Doak Walker Award winner last year, who was our running back, who, the Doak Walker is the top running back in America. And he was back, and there was Heisman chatter, and it's all fallen apart. And I think we're 3-4. I can't even remember anymore. It's just become a painful heap of losses. But I'm really happy for the Cyclones because I understand what it's like to be in a program. I mean, Oklahoma State probably over the last 20 years has been significantly better than Iowa State. But before that, we were pretty much... there's not a tremendous amount of distance between the programs. I do remember 2011 being undefeated and ranked number 2 and came into Ames and lost to unranked Iowa State, who had a losing record at the time. Maybe some of you might remember that. And I really wish this year that the Cyclones were coming to Stillwater, but as is now the case in the Big 12, we don't play each other every year anymore, so we won't have that opportunity. But since we don't get to do that, I do hope Iowa State goes as far as they possibly can and does really well and wins the Big 12 and all that, because we're certainly not in that picture. Of course, the Hawks aren't doing too bad. Not the best season in the world, but not too bad. But it is that time of year, and it's I do enjoy this time of year. I don't really pay any attention at all to the NFL, so I do like the college football, and it is. I'm actually going to go. I'm going to take my daughter and her friend and both my daughters and my oldest daughter's friend, who her parents both went to Iowa, and they are both juniors together, and the hope is that we can go out and tailgate. We're going next weekend, the 2nd, for the Wisconsin game. And we are, my daughter's, she's a junior, my oldest, Sydney, she's a junior now, and so she's sort of thinking about where to go to college. And, of course, I went to Oklahoma State, and I really enjoyed being able to come home on the weekends. And I used to drive down to Dewey, Oklahoma, and visit my grandparents. And on the weekends, sometimes I just go out and have lunch with them and go back. So it's about an hour from Stillwater to Dewey, and about an hour and 20, hour and 30 to Tulsa, where my mom lived. But it was nice. It was nice to be able to come home for a weekend, and it wasn't a giant expense of either time or money. And so I don't know. I just really enjoyed that. I think that it's a good thing, and Iowa's certainly a bargain. Both Iowa and Iowa State are certainly bargains in respect to what you get for what you pay for. It's a pretty good bargain because they're both solid schools, and they both under $15,000 a year. Which, as soon as you start shopping out of state tuition somewhere, you realize it's crazy. It's like $30,000 to $50,000 for state schools out of state. So there's a lot of reasons I'd love for my daughter to go to Iowa. So we are going over there in a couple weeks. And, well, from the time you hear this, it'll be the next weekend, of course. And so it should be nice. It's an exciting thing for me because I love college football, and I've never been to Kinnick. I have been to Iowa State a couple times to see the Cowboys play, and I think we went up there one time to see if we could watch them beat the Sooners. And I believe when we did, I think they actually did beat the Sooners when we were there. Anyway, I've not been to Kinnick, and so obviously it's one of the great stadiums in college, and I'm looking forward to it. So that's kind of how fall is cruising along. And so for those of you who I have not or who haven't heard me talk about my young partner, Dr. Michael Dirks he's been coming down for a couple of years. He was up in Spencer, and he went there immediately out of his training, and so he was up there with a group. And then I took this job back in August of 2020. And when it got time to start looking for a second, I found out that he was around, and we started talking, and he then was coming down, and it was once a month, and it was twice a month, and then it just kept building, and we kept saying, hey, it'd be great to have you here. And of course, his parents, he's got 3 young children, and a wife who grew up in town here too, and so obviously, and all of their parents are still here. So we had some help recruiting him, let's say, because there are some very happy grandparents in that family right now, I'm quite certain. But I talk about the differentiation of what we do, and for me, I talk about sort of the pain modeling for the knee replacement and the shoulder resurfacing and the Regenin-10 and things like that. And for Dr. Dirks, I mean, the big one for him, I mean, he does broad spectrum, sports medicine and fracture care and joints, which is basically orthopedics. And the one that really differentiates what he's able to do is the anterior hip going from the front. So using the anterior hip and the Mako robot it's a thing that to me is just so many levels above the other way of doing it. So so you can go anterior in the front or posterior in the back. Now, I believe that the anterior approach is better. Overall, there might be a tiny 0.5% or 1% higher rate of complications, but there are other complications that you're just never going to have, like a dislocation, and a dislocation can happen late, meaning years and years after your hip replacement. I've seen people who 12, 14 years after a hip replacement, and they're getting up out of their lounge chair and they dislocate their hip. That's not really possible going through the front because the hip wants to come out the back. That's just kind of the anatomy, because when your hip bends, that's, picture bringing your knees up to your chest. That's kind of wanting to push the hip out the back of the socket. Well, if you've gone through the back and then repaired it, there's some chance that it's never going to be quite as strong as it was before. However, if you go through the front and the back of the hip capsule and all that soft tissue back there has never been disrupted, it's nearly impossible for it to dislocate. I don't know that I've ever even heard of that, dislocating out the back after having an anterior hip done or going through the front. So that makes it, just on that aspect, it makes it, to me, what I would have. There's no question in the world. This is what I always tell my patients, is that I'm going to do for you what I would have done for me, what I would do. For instance, the Regenin-10 patch, right? That's the shoulder patch that actually regrows your rotator cuff. It's a biologic device that is made actually of Achilles tendon from cows, and we essentially staple that on top of a cuff that for instance, in my case, I had a partial thickness tear, and that partial thickness tear meant that I could, I had exhausted all of my options. So I'd had physical therapy. I had actually had surgery on my shoulder 20 years ago when I was doing my fellowships down in Australia, and the guy that I went down there to study shoulder surgery under, He just shaved my shoulder bones a little bit and gave my cuff a little bit more room to run. But I continued over the next 10 years to surf a lot and then getting into the gym. And then when I moved back to the mainland, I stopped surfing, but I was still in the gym. And it got to the point where my shoulder was just so painful all the time that I couldn't do even one push-up. And I had this Regeniten patch done. 48 hours later, I'm out of my sling. 10 days later, I'm back at work. And now this is fully 4 years later, and my shoulder is great. And I work out really hard all the time. And it's been just fantastic for me. And so my point with that is that I do the things for the patients that I would do on myself. Like this is what I believe is the right thing to do for you. If I were needing, and thank goodness I don't at 54, but you never know. I mean, I haven't x-rayed my hips. They don't hurt, but who knows? If I needed a hip replacement, 100% I would go through the front, and 100% I would want the Mako robot. And, going through the front, again, you don't have to do what are called hip precautions, where you have to be careful if you're sitting down, and, going to the bathroom can be a position of danger afterwards. And sometimes people will get a high toilet seat, sometimes not. And there's all these other things, and I wouldn't want to be dealing with any of it. I would just prefer to go ahead and just go through the front. I would probably leave the hospital that day or the next day, and then hopefully I would be able to do everything I want, except I don't know that I would ever surf again because, I don't know, I would be afraid that if I took a tumble, it might dislocate. But people do surf with total hips. And, living in Iowa, I don't really have to think about it all that much. I do. Last time I surfed was last Christmas. We went to Hawaii to visit friends and took my daughters out, and that was fun. But, it's not something that on the day-to-day I have to make the decision whether I'm going to surf. But my point in that story was, number one, that, the anterior total hip, especially using the Mako, is exactly what I would have done for me if I needed it. And I don't do total hips anymore. And Dr. Dirks is excellent. He's a sharp young doc, and he's dedicated. And I knew what was going to happen. I knew eventually, given that he grew up here, and I've had a fair number of patients who knew him, of course. I mean, I'm from the community, and I knew that I was going to get a story that I was going to be able to share eventually. And there's probably going to be a fair number of stories, and this one just happened to be the first one. So it was a patient of mine who's been with me for years and asked me if I was, happy with Dr. Dirks coming and being a partner. I said, oh man, it's so great. He's just super talented and conscientious, and obviously he's from here, so he would love to have every single case go absolutely perfectly and every patient to be absolutely happy. And I mean, wouldn't we all like that? But he's from here. So these are like everybody else at St. Anthony's, that I talk about that feeling of what it's like to be in a hospital where people are taking care of their relatives and neighbors. And I really like that. And, he fits right into that. He grew up here. I mean, you couldn't find another orthopedic surgeon who wants to have orthopedics do well here at Carroll more than he does. I would say I'm a close second because it's the place where I am and I want it to work very, very well. But anyway, he's, like I said, so he's super dedicated. I get along well with him. His wife is lovely. Kids are lovely. And so the other day, this patient of mine said, you want to hear a story about Dr. Dirks? And I said, yes. I would absolutely love to hear a story about Dr. Dirks because I figured it would probably be a fun story that I could share here on the radio. And so he says, when Dr. Dirks was young, and we're talking grade school, there was a little boy in the class that had cancer, and he couldn't go outside to play in recess. He said, and Dr. Dirks would sit inside and play board games instead of going outside to play with that boy. And I thought, wow. I mean, because Michael Dirks, he's a real athletic guy. He loves to do stuff like that. I'm sure that he was athletic like that his whole life. And to have that kind of presence of mind and kindness at that age, I was really taken aback. Wow, that's really really cool. That is a wonderful story to know, and I think it says a lot about who he is at his deepest core. And it just makes me happy. It's a touching story, and it does not surprise me. Although I'm surprised almost that any kid, most kids just aren't gonna do that. But it was pretty amazing. I think that's an amazing. I think it's a testament to, like I said, who he is at his deepest core. And I haven't even told him that that the patient told me this story, so he is likely to hear this from somebody. Hey, Dr. Godding said this on the radio. But yes, share that story freely. It's a touching story, and like I said, really says a lot about who he is. And so, yeah, and it's fun having him here, and he's obviously settled in great because he's from here, and we're just plugging along, building orthopedics here at St. Anthony's, and it's a good thing. It's nice. So I just wanted to talk a little bit of football, since I've been remiss and have not talked a lot of football, and kind of go over again why the anterior robotic hip is such a differentiator. I didn't mention that there's only a handful of places you can get that in Iowa. The anterior Mako hip. There are other robots. I think the Mako is the top platform. So there's only 5 or 6, last time I talked to the rep, there's only 5 or 6 places in Iowa where you can get an anterior Mako robot hip. And here we are in Carroll with one of them, in a big, beautiful hospital where all the people are taking care of their neighbors and families, so they take care of them very well. So that's that's where I'm sitting on this day. And I hope everybody is having a wonderful fall. Please remember that you still have time to get out and walk a little bit, and before it starts to get too icy, and everybody should be getting themselves ready. If you are elderly, just start getting things lined out for the winter so that you don't slip and fall. If you maybe need to use a cane when there's ice, just use a cane, because I know it's getting ready to be ice time, and none of us are really all that looking forward to it. So with that, I will be back next week, and you have a blessed week, Iowa.
This has been the St. Anthony Hospital Orthopedic Show with Dr. Richard Godding. For more information about Dr. Godding, his practice, or St. Anthony Hospital Orthopedics, go to www.santanthonyhospital.org or make an appointment by calling 712-794-5536.